Technology 1, Lama 0. The score is consistent at the very least. Well, I want to take a moment, first of all, to thank you for coming today. I really appreciate you being here and bringing your goodness to this place. And I want to thank you for supporting Columbus KTC with your presence and for opening your heart with generosity to just be here with us today. And we're happy to have you. I love it when this room is full of the goodness that is meditation and full of the goodness that is the sort of uplifted viewpoint of the Buddha's teachings. So thank you from me to you. I have a joke and I have a Dharma talk. Which do you want first? I have to first, okay, we'll do the fun part first. No, we'll save it to the last. It'll be the last question. We'll put it in place of the last question. As you know, I struggle with humor addiction. I love to say things that are meaningful and powerful, because the Dharma is meaningful and the Dharma is powerful. But sometimes I cannot resist the joke. I can't resist. It just happens. Anyway, so you get the idea. I'm trying my best, but it's one day at a time. I'm going to tell a story today. This is, by the way, the joke is about one of the coolest Christmas gifts I've gotten this year. So that'll be, we'll look into that in a minute. And then I have a Dharma talk that has a little bit of everything in it. It has Charles Dickens's Christmas Carol in it. It has the story of the life of the Buddha in it. And it's got my last 72 hours in it. So it's gonna hopefully it will be meaningful and edifying for you. But first, I'm going to actually remember this time, for the audience at home as well as the folks who are here, to begin with the statement of aspiration. We aspire to goodness in all that we do, and we try to do it at the beginning of every Dharma event and activity here, to state our confidence in our own Buddha nature and our confidence in our capacity to attain it, and our wish to develop as much compassion as possible and wisdom as possible while we are doing it, while we're on that training path. So what we'll do is we'll recite this traditional formula, refuge prayer. We'll recite it 2 times in English, and then I'll chant it once in Tibetan. First of all, pardon my English pronunciation, and please pardon my Tibetan pronunciation. My teacher said my Tibetan pronunciation was horrible. So just so you know. Okay. All right. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. O Sanjay Chudan Soki Chonamla Jangchu Pardu Dhani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinsogi Pesunamki Drola Pinchir Sanjay Druparsho. Okay, thanks very much. I'll say another short prayer of my own, and then we'll begin. O Palden Sawelama Rinpoche Tagi Chiwar Pede Ten Shula Kadrin Jembu Kone Che Sunte Kusum Taking a Drop Sal to Soul. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so I hope that those of you who observe Hanukkah and Christmas have had a good week. And I hope that you will all have a blessed and wonderful New Year this coming week. Speaking of which, we will be here on New Year's Day at the doors, I think, will open at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we'll be doing prayers for world peace starting at 7:30 a.m. We will be online on Zoom that day. You can go to our online, the Columbus KTC webpage, and look at the online programs in order to get the link for our Zoom programming that morning. So anyway, just a program note that we'd love to see you if you can be here. In addition, we will be online only chanting the compassion mantra, Chenrezi, at 7 o'clock on New Year's Eve. It just so happens that our weekly Tuesday night compassion chant happened to fall on Christmas Eve and now New Year's Eve this year. So we're going to be gathering online for those prayers. So you're welcome to attend. Okay, so my talk for today, let's see if I can remember exactly how I titled it. I think I titled it The Three Ghosts of Christmas, a Bardo Story. Those of you who are familiar with the famous Christmas story, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, know that in this 19th century fairy tale, an avaricious and greedy man is visited by three ghosts on Christmas Eve, one from his past, one from the present, and one from his future. And through the process of experiencing the presence of these three ghosts, he comes to see that his life has become somewhat meaningless, and that he will not be remembered with kindness after he dies because of his greed and his avariciousness. And of course, like in most of these fairy tales, he does change and reform. And becomes a happy person. So in a way, it's a redemption story, which we all love, because I think all human beings love redemption stories because they want to believe that they too can be redeemed, and they too can be changed positively by their lives and the things they do in their life. Whereas the main character in the Christmas Carol, I love it that Dickens gave them such unusual names. Ebenezer Scrooge. The word Scrooge has come into the English language as being any person who has Scrooge-like qualities of greed and avariciousness. And in fact, I mean, you know that a word has been established in English when the Walt Disney Company gives the name of Scrooge McDuck to one of their animated characters. Anyway, so we look at characters like Ebenezer Scrooge and think, well, they're not exactly like us, and maybe we're not exactly like that. But we do have our own set of problems. We do. We have our own set of problems that we experience, and we have our own set of difficulties that we face. And I had a few of those this week. And that has to do with my last 72 hours, which I'll talk about in a minute. But before I do that, I do need to say that in the story of Buddhism, we also have our version of A Christmas Carol. There are no ghosts in this one. But there is a reckoning. Don't you love English? Reckoning. You know, the idea that we come face to face with something that we have to confront and face it. I love the word reckoning. It's really fun. It's a great word. So we have a story of reckoning and redemption. And that's the story of Prince Siddhartha, the founder of Buddhism. Prince Siddhartha, born in a wealthy family, had everything possible, had his life handed to him literally on a silver platter. But his parents were keeping him sheltered in the palace compound. He spent his entire youth and teenage years and into his 20s in the palace compound because they had been told when he was a baby, they had his fortune told. And the fortune teller told the parents of Prince Siddhartha that their son would either become a great monarch, a great king, or he would become a holy man. So, confronted with these two choices, the majority of parents I know would probably choose king over holy man. So, in order, he said, how do we avoid the fate of him becoming a holy man instead of a great king? And the fortune teller said, well, that's simple. Just shield him from all suffering. Make sure he doesn't see any of the sufferings of humanity, which when you're really rich, it's not, you can do that. That's something you can kind of do. In fact, even now we have some kind of phrase for that. I think they call it low friction living. Anyway, so the idea is that because Prince Siddhartha's parents were so wealthy, they could hide him essentially in a very large estate and give him everything he possibly could want. And he didn't become curious about what was outside the walls because they kept him so busy, he just didn't have time to think about the world beyond the palace. Doesn't this sound familiar? I think sometimes that we are actually, I read a scholar wrote an essay once, and the scholar said, all of us will eventually live the life of the Buddha. Not that we're going to be born in a royal state, not like that, but that we actually will be born amid wealth and luxury. Compared to a lot of people in the world, here we are. It's kind of creepy and amazing. So all of us will live the life of the Buddha. We will be born in a comfortable situation. We will come to a reckoning, a moment where we realize that there is more to life than material things, more to life than money, more to life. And this is now starting to sound like a Christmas carol, isn't it? More to life than money and power and influence and so forth. And that we will turn toward religion as Prince Siddhartha did. But how did that happen for Prince Siddhartha? Did he wake up one day and said, I think I'll become a holy man? Didn't work like that. He actually demanded from his father to be allowed out of jail, essentially. He began to realize that he had been in the palace his entire life, on the grounds of this vast estate, his entire life. And he didn't even know the people he was going to rule. He had never even seen them. So he had a good argument for his father. He had a good argument to say, Dad, how can I be a king if I've never met my people? And his father didn't have an answer for that, so he put him in a chariot and had him driven around with a chaperone who could hopefully hide him from all of those dangerous things the fortune teller had told him about. But as you know, with these stories, there's always something that goes wrong. And so Prince Siddhartha did actually encounter 4 things. See, this is how I got confused about Ebenezer Scrooge. He only had 3. Prince Siddhartha had 4. So the 3 that Prince Siddhartha saw were he saw a sick person lying by the road, sick. And he saw a person who was aged walking with a cane, okay? And then the last thing he saw was a corpse being carried to the cemetery. So each time he encountered one of these 3 things, he asked his charioteer, his chaperone, well, what's going on with this? And the charioteer said, oh, my prince, this is everybody's life. Everybody gets sick. Everybody gets old. Everybody dies. And it was as though he had been smacked in the head with the reality of it all. Because the charioteer had the nerve to say, even you, my prince, someday you will die. And these moments where we come face to face with mortality may happen for us when we're young. They may happen for us when we're teenagers. They may happen for us in our 20s, 30s, 40s, or later. But this moment when we are confronted with our own mortality, it's a wake-up call. It's a, oh, my goodness, this could happen to me. I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and we talked about how many of us go through our life thinking, oh, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's going to be fine. Everything's just going to continue as it is now forever. We're always going to be in a situation of comfort. We're always going to be in a situation of good health. We're always going to be in a situation where people look after us and so on. We just make this assumption with like zero evidence that it's going to happen until something happens. And then we recognize, oh my gosh, they were right. What am I going to do now? How will I cope? How will I cope? What will I do? And so this is what I want to talk about, like this experience. And because this is what Ebenezer Scrooge went through, this is what the fictional character Ebenezer Scrooge went through. This is what Prince Siddhartha went through. And by the way, Prince Siddhartha, when he got home, he couldn't forget it. And he went over the wall of the palace compound within hours, changed his clothes with somebody else, and ran away from home. He left his wife and child in the care of his father and stepmother because he had actually done his duty to the kingdom and produced an heir. So now his work was essentially done. And he could go and try to discover the answer to the question, why is there suffering? Why is this suffering happening to my people? Why? Why is it happening? And so he went on a quest, and that took him 6 years of studying with all the holy people of his region at his time, and practicing such severe asceticism, not eating, not drinking, sitting under the hot sun on the clay bank of a river, baking, thinking that he could somehow go beyond suffering by entering a deep meditative state through deprivation. It didn't work, and he was almost dead from malnutrition when he remembered a music lesson he had received where the stringed instrument player said, you can't have your string too tight, but you can't have your string too loose, or you won't get the right sound. And he realized that he had been pushing too hard, and he needed to let up. He needed to moderate his approach and take what later became known as the middle path. Free from the extremes of luxury and deprivation, he took this middle path, and some people say it was within hours of changing to this middle path. Some people say it's within days. But whatever it was, he attained a very deep state of meditation, and in that deep state of meditation, he came to understand suffering and its causes. And in understanding suffering and its causes, he became, I guess you could say, illuminated from the inside. He became the awakened one, the Buddha. And then he was requested. At first he didn't know what to do with this knowledge, but someone requested him to teach, and he began to teach. And we have the teachings of the Buddha that we know today and that we ourselves can practice today. The Buddha said he was not a god. Everybody asked him, which of the gods are you? And he said, none of them. They said, are you an ordinary person? He said, no. I'm an awakened person. I've awakened to the truth of suffering and its causes. And he taught what are called now the Four Truths, known by the noble. See, in those days, it was thought you had to be born noble, but the Buddha's idea was that you could become noble by practicing the middle path and becoming a Buddha yourself. He said all beings have the potential to become Buddha. That he wasn't different, you know what I mean? He was not unusual. He wasn't a freak. You know, he was somebody just like us, and we could become like him, and he wanted everybody to know that. You didn't have to be special. You didn't have to be born noble to practice his path. And then the path he taught was these four truths. Suffering is part of life. Suffering is part of life. That's the first thing we have to come to know. Second is that suffering has a cause. And that cause is not external. The cause isn't like the boss. A cause of suffering isn't, the government. The cause of suffering isn't your next door neighbor or the family member or whatever. The cause of suffering is within us. It is our clinging and fixation. We fixate on things and we want them to stay the same, or we want them to change, but we want it. We want. We have our own kind of greed and avarice, right? We want things to go our way and be our way, and when we want people to be what we want them to be and do what we want them to do, and if they don't, well, that's the end of it. So we have to know, K-N-O-W, we have to know suffering and know that it's part of life, because if we don't, we're going to spend our lives running from it, fearful of the suffering of life. And then the fear of that suffering is going to cause us more pain than the suffering itself. It's very difficult. I call it value-added suffering. It's not just the thing that hurts, it's the fear and the anger and everything else that goes with it. But knowing suffering isn't enough. You have to know the cause, which is this clinging and fixation. And what do we cling to and fixate on the most? Ourselves. Me and I. Me and I. What is it? Me, myself, and I. Me and I. And we cling to these things. And we want things to be our way. So then if that's the cause of suffering, what's the solution? That's the third truth. Because it has a cause, it has a solution. So simplistically stated, if clinging is the problem, the solution is letting go. But you can't say to somebody who's suffering, just let that go. It's not like that, You can't just say that to someone. It's cruel, it's wrong. You have to give them a method. You have to give them a method, a path, a way to let go. And that's why he taught the fourth noble truth, which is the path. Eightfold Noble Path is too hard, too many things for me to remember. As you know, my memory doesn't go that far, so I use the four statements from the sutras. Do no harm, practice virtue, tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Thankfully, that last one's a summary, so now I only have 3 things to remember. Do no harm means to not harm yourself, not harm others. Do virtuous things means to take care of yourself and benefit others. And tame the mind means to meditate so that you can know your mind well enough to transcend harm and transcend the world of suffering, which he called samsara. I love the word samsara because it implies it's related to a word for ocean in his language. So it's like vast. Samsara is like this vast world of suffering. There's so much suffering, it's like you can't count it. It's big. So between the stories of the Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge, the fictional greedy man being visited by 3 ghosts, and if you go to Prince Siddhartha's story where he saw 4 things, oh yeah, the 4th thing, I totally forgot. The fourth thing. What was the fourth thing? The fourth thing he saw on the way back. Whew. Darn, I kind of ruined a punchline there. Anyway, the fourth thing was that he saw a person meditating under a tree. And he said to his chaperone, "What's that guy doing?" He said, "Oh, my prince, that man is trying to go beyond the suffering of the world." Ding, light bulb. And that's what made Prince Siddhartha go over the fence. So this is what happens to all of us. That essayist that I told you about earlier that said that all of us are going to live the life of the Buddha. We're all going to be born in comfortable circumstances, but at some point become dissatisfied and like wonder what else there is. And then we're going to not necessarily go over the wall exactly, but we're going to start seeking something. We're going to seek and we're going to hopefully find something that will help us to go beyond suffering. So so then because we can all become Buddha, all of us can become Buddha, we are all eventually going to live that life. Maybe not this time, maybe next time, but we're going to do it. So, and anyhow, speaking of wake-up calls, I had an interesting weekend last weekend. As you know, I was supposed to teach last weekend, and thank heaven, thank you, Lama Tom. Lama Tom substituted for me, because I made the mistake of thinking that I was going to have dental surgery and that I was going to be just fine after that. And I wasn't just fine after that. In fact, it was kind of tough. In fact, it was virtually impossible. It was really tough. Anyway, they told me that I might have a reaction to the medication used for anesthesia, and that it would happen in the first few hours after the surgery. It didn't, so I was perfectly relieved. But then 48 to 60 hours later, it happened. And I figured I best get somebody to look at me. So, of course, you go to your local hospital, and they say, "Oh, you're having those symptoms? Come in, let's look at you." And so I got kept overnight in the hospital. And I had what you might call a Bardo experience while I was there. Those of you who are unfamiliar with the word Bardo, bar means essentially like middle, and do is like a dwell, to dwell. So it's like the idea is that I was someplace that was in between. I was someplace in between. Generally, when you hear the word Bardo in books about Tibetan Buddhism, they use it to describe the state that arises for a person in their mind after death and before their next rebirth. That's generally what's regarded as Bardo. But actually, there's a Bardo that is this life, and there's a Bardo that is sleeping and dreaming. There's all kinds of these in-betweens. I don't know if there's such a thing as a hospital Bardo, however. But I think I may have discovered it. Because, when you're in the hospital, you have like zero control over anything, and everybody is always coming at you, and they're saying, "More blood, please." All the things that you really have trouble with. Anything that you think you might not like, it's probably going to be on the list of things you must do. So, everything did turn out all right, so we'll cut to the chase right away. I got out the next day. But during that and everything is fine now, and everything was fine. Anyhow, so that part's all over with. But the part that was interesting was the things that I saw and the things that I experienced almost felt like a message. Almost felt like a message. Like maybe the ghosts of Christmas past or present or maybe even future were visiting me. And in fact, the message was so exact, I'm just going to give you the message so that, you don't have to have this same experience to get some of this info. So it was very Bardo-like. Very Christmas Carol-like. And so it happened when the internal medicine specialist visited me it started in the emergency room because, you get visited by all kinds of ghosts. You get visited by all kinds of apparitions. I had one that appeared in scrubs, and it was a internal medicine specialist. And they're checking me in because they're going to observe me overnight to make sure everything is fine. And he says, he's got a list, he's going down the list. Okay, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? He said, oh, yes, and do you have advanced healthcare directives? And I'm like, yeah, I think I've got those. And he said, well, then, if anything, were to happen to you, do you want, to be shocked and resuscitated and stuff? And I'm like, I just came to the hospital because of the pain, okay? We're not talking about any of this stuff, but the words were out of his mouth, and they were in here, and they were in here. And I had my little wake-up call. And I realized that I had executed those documents when I was in my 40s. And I just turned 70 this year. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if my answers at 70 would be different than my answers at 40. Interesting, yeah? So it's like if somebody asked you today about those things, what would your answer be? Well, anyway, you get the picture. And I'm like, ugh. And he could see that my eyes were like, ugh. He could actually tell that he had rung my bell or something. And he's like, okay, you don't have to do that today. He said, but I would invite you to start thinking about it. He said, for right now, we're just going to say, you want everything. And I'm like, okay, but do I? So anyhow, as you can see now, this story is taking a bit of a dark turn. Very sorry for this, but it's an interesting trip. So everything was great, and I got to a room, and I was all by myself, and I got to, snooze a little bit for about an hour and a half before they woke me up for the next thing. And while I was at the testing that they had arranged for me in the morning, they brought me a roommate. So I came back, and I had a roommate. The roommate was an older person, like me. Older person, but her health was poor, and she had been brought to my floor from another floor in the hospital where she had been entered into hospice care for end-of-life care. And this was new to her and new to her family. And they were having to, the whole family was there because she was failing and she was doing badly. And the family was having to make decisions. What are we going to do for our mother or our grandmother? What will we do for her? Will we try to prolong her life with this treatment or that treatment or this thing and that thing? And it was almost like this situation for me was tailored somehow to fit my discomfort at the question about advanced directives. It was almost like it was written in order to drive that point home. It's like, by the way, have you paid attention to this since last night? No, thank you. But in any case, she was very uncomfortable. There is no two ways about it. She had a mask covering her face to help her breathe. She hated it. She kept trying to remove it. She had to have someone sitting by her bed to make sure she didn't try to get up and didn't try to take things off her face. She was delirious and suffering greatly, and her family was pained in their being present with her during her suffering. So it was not easy, definitely not easy. And eventually they did make the decisions to not give this extreme treatment, not to give that extreme treatment, not to give that extreme treatment, but to stabilize her and send her back to hospice floor. And so that happened later in the day, right before I was released, because my test results came back, And the internal medicine specialist, a different one this time, came into my room. And again, it was as though the conversation was tailor-made for what I was feeling. It's like, thank you, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. You've been giving me some messages. I sure appreciate it. So the internal medicine specialist came in, and he told me the obvious. You are 70 years old, and you have this problem, and you have this problem, and you have this problem. What are your goals for the next few months? What would you like to do over the next few months? Well, I'd like to do this, and I'd like to do this, and I'd like to do this. And he said, that's good. He said, but I'm going to tell you what I tell my kids, he said. He said, I got a bunch of kids, and I'm going to tell you what I told them. He said, you got to make a goal and make it clear to yourself what your goal is to get well, what your goal is to feel better and get well and live your best life. Set your goal. Then, he said, be consistent. Be consistent in following that goal. And then be persistent and not ever give up. Set a goal, be consistent in your application, and be persistent in that you never give it up. And I'm like, wow, that's how you get to Buddhahood. It's like, wow, that's how you get to Buddhahood. The goal is Buddhahood, right? You have to meditate and practice every day, just a little bit. And so, okay, consistent, and then never give up. All right. Middle path, I've just had it described for me in 2 ways. Those of you who know me know that I have a hard time sitting still. My mother said, never mind, I won't use the colorful colloquial expression she used for me, but I was like something in the wind. And so, the point was that I have a hard time sitting still, but guess what? This chicken has to exercise now and has to eat right and has to lose weight if I am to accomplish my goals and forestall all of those situations that have been brilliantly illustrated for me. And I actually do have to start thinking about those advanced directives. So I have a friend who is an emergency room nurse who is now a hospice nurse, and I'm going to interview her extensively. You know who you are. I'll call you later today. And talk to her about how to reframe the way I'm looking at my life and how to reframe those decisions. So I'm sorry that the talk took a little bit of a dark turn there, but I think we all need these. We all need to get in the chariot. Get in the chariot. Take a ride around the kingdom. See those 4 sights. See the person who's sick. See the person who's aged. See the person on the way to the cemetery. And then see the person who is sitting under the tree, meditating and trying to go beyond the suffering of the world. We all have to get in the chariot. Get in. We're going for a ride. And I'm hoping that while this may not have been the usual kind of uplifting talk you'd like to hear, that sometimes I think we do need to get that reality check given to us somehow. Sometimes you have to get it from an old person. And like Prince Siddhartha and like the fictional and very real Ebenezer Scrooges out there, we all go on thinking we're going to live forever, and we forget what's important. We get lost in the minutia, the little details of everyday life, and we don't pay attention. But we have to plan for these things so that we can be very clear-eyed and more confident as we face them. I have to tell you the truth. I was kind of surprised that I was able to be present with all of these things that happened. And I'm guessing it's because I meditated for a few years. And that and that the suffering that I experienced was not so severe that I couldn't say to myself, this is the purification of negative karma. I couldn't say, may all beings be free of this kind of suffering. I could say that. I could say, may all beings be free of this kind of suffering. I could say, these are all the practices you learn on that middle path, how to have compassion for yourself, how to have compassion for others. And of course, I'm also restarting the senior exercise program. I'll see you guys down at CTEC in a couple of weeks. And I'm going to be thinking carefully about all those advanced directives. But I figured that it would be good to share these things while they're on my mind. I could have waited and done a different talk this week. But we got New Year's coming up, and everybody makes resolutions at New Year's. I say just do one thing, make one realistic goal, and make that to be working with your mind this year. You know, may I learn how to meditate. May I learn how to be consistent in my meditation. May I learn to be persistent in my meditation, like that. And that way, because your mind, my teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, talked to one of the members of our center who was dying of cancer. And he said to the man, well, he said, I have to be honest with you. He said, your body quits on you. Your body, it just does. It's going to quit on you. He said, but your Buddha nature is never going to quit on you. Your mind, which is Buddha, is never going to quit on you. It will always be there for you. And that's what the guy took with him and practiced in the last weeks of his life. It was amazing to see how peaceful he became knowing this. That, you know, even though the body quits, the mind doesn't quit. The Buddha nature doesn't quit. It doesn't take a vacation. It's there always. So anyway, it's time for me to stop talking. I just looked at the clock, and it's like, it's time for me to stop talking. And to see if there's any comments or discussion, and then I'm glad I waited to tell the joke later. So anybody have thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah, you can use one of the 2 microphones. Yeah.
Thank you, as usual, for this talk. I thought it had really strong resonances with a quote that someone shared to me and a few others in this room earlier this week from Jack Kornfield. And it said the quote said that this was a Tibetan practice, although I did some brief Googling and couldn't find, but yeah. It's very valuable. It was essentially that every being is enlightened except you. And therefore, every being does exactly what is needed in the moment to serve the awakening of your compassion, your patience, your presence, your understanding. And even though this was just recently shared, the past few days I've been applying it. For example, leaving the store yesterday when people were crazy because it was nice out and lots of honking, just being with all these awakened beings and imagining and wondering, what could this do? What can I learn from this moment? And it sounds like that's really resonant with what you went through. So I just wanted to share that. It's been a transformative thing for me just these past few days. I
really, really appreciate you sharing this, because I was talking to another Dharma friend today, and like everybody, there are so much great Dharma out there, and so many quotations and so many teachings, really. And so that teaching, there's like a segment of humanity that teaching will resonate with, that everybody else is enlightened but me, and I've got to like get with it. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, for me it's helped me to become patient. I won't say become because it's very new, but be patient with others, in the moment. So it's kind of getting there and just being more compassionate and understanding. I think it resonates on that level.
I really do appreciate this. I know my teacher basically said, we're not Buddhas yet, therefore we're not going to be fully compassionate yet. And so sometimes we are. He said, if you start to feel resentment for another person that you're trying to help, it's time for you to back up. Mm-hmm. So I mean, both of those things are true. other beings are Buddha, and we're not, and we're working toward Buddhahood. But if that one Buddha over there gets on your last raw nerve, you know what I'm saying? You know, we have to have compassion for ourselves also for not being enlightened yet. I think that's a cool thing. Oh, I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. All right, awesome. Anybody else have comments, questions, thoughts? Going once. Going twice. Well, then it's time for the humor. Once again, I really do appreciate it. I strongly recommend that everybody find an approach to Dharma that works for you. Because, you know, we're all in different places. That's the one thing I noticed, is that everybody resonates, you know, with different things, and it's like, and my teacher said this once too. He said, if you can take what happens to you as being purification and take what happens to you as being part of your path, he said, that's the best, you know. And then he said, you know, but be patient with the process because it takes time. It does. It just takes a lot of time. And there are going to be days when it's not easy. Then you have to have self-compassion, right? Okay. So this actually is related to the joke is actually related to the last Dharma talk that I gave, which was about the 7-branch prayer and how you could, you know, say prayers very easily and be inspired by them. And I mentioned the fact that the word samsara, you know, which is the ocean of suffering, is now like it's out there. I don't know if you guys know this, but like if you've noticed this in your life, but I'm hearing the word karma way more now than I did in the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s. More people are familiar with karma now. They may not quite understand what it is, and they may get it totally wrong. And, you know, like that TV show that was about karma, My Name is Earl, and if you have heard of this, then you are old. Anyhow, it was a comedy. It was a situation comedy about a guy who was trying to make amends for all the things he had done wrong, you know, when he was a bad guy. And he kept speaking to karma as though karma were a person. And darn you, karma, and so forth and so on. So he didn't quite have the karma thing right, but it was amusing. Well, anyway, the word samsara is now working its way into culture, and I got samsara given to me for Christmas. It is an eau de cologne or something. We're really sorry that this company, I won't pronounce it right because it's French, Guerlain, in Paris, made this. So if anybody wants to come up afterward and find out what samsara smells like, feel absolutely welcome to come up here and then try a little samsara out. I have not opened the box. I don't think I should regift it. I kind of want to keep it forever because it is a joke that, I mean, what were they thinking? Do they even know what the word means? I mean, you know, do they have any idea at all what it means? Poor things. But there you are, samsara in a bottle. Who knew? Who knew? Okay. So we'll close today with a prayer. There's a prayer on the back of the sheet. I also want to remind everyone before we do this that there will be a talk and a refuge vow ceremony at 1:30 in this room. So if you want to go down and have a second cup of coffee or grab a bite and then get back here, we will be doing a ceremony. Lama Tom is unable to be here today, but I'll be here, and we'll start at 1:30. I'll give a short talk on the meaning of the Buddhist vow of refuge. That's the vow where you take the Buddha as your teacher, the Dharma as your path, and the Sangha as your community. It's like your first step on the Buddhist path. I'll give a short talk on that, and everybody's welcome to come to the short talk. Then the vow ceremony will be given. People are welcome to observe the vow, or they can leave. But I just wanted to let people know that is happening this afternoon. But meanwhile, we have like dark stories to dedicate the merit of. We have this. We'll recite this one time through in English, bringing together all the goodness that we've accomplished by studying and practicing the Dharma today and dedicating it to the liberation of beings from samsara. We'll start with the words "by this merit." By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is. Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way. And all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path. I completely dedicate all this virtue. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next time. I think I'll be here next week, so appreciate all of it. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, the sound department.